Ryan Matthews was a man who thrived on extreme sports. His passion for rock climbing, base jumping, and paragliding kept him on the edge of life. It was more than a hobby, it was his way of feeling alive. For Ryan, the risk and reward of extreme sports were part of his identity. He worked as a professional photographer, capturing the breathtaking moments of athletes performing high-risk stunts. His work took him across the globe, sometimes leaving his wife, Emma, and their 4-year-old son, Lucas, at home for weeks at a time. Emma understood Ryan's need for adventure. In the beginning, she had admired his passion, even joined him on a few climbing trips when their son was younger. But over the years, as Lucas grew older, Emma found herself tied down more and more by the responsibilities of motherhood and her job as a schoolteacher. Still, she supported Ryan's career, and though they spent long periods apart, their marriage was built on trust. Or so Ryan thought. For the first few years of their marriage, their bond seemed unbreakable. They communicated well, had their moments of deep connection, and shared similar values. But as time passed, things began to change. Ryan wasn't home often. He knew the demands of his work left Emma with more responsibilities at home. He called when he could, sent texts, and tried to make the best of the time they had when he was in town. But every time he returned home, the house seemed quieter. Emma seemed more distant. There were no more long conversations about their dreams or future plans. Instead, their time together felt like routine, like something they were both just going through the motions of. At first, Ryan attributed it to the pressures of life, raising a young child, juggling busy work schedules, and the stress of being apart for so long. But slowly, the distance between them grew. Emma had become increasingly withdrawn. She was still a loving mother to Lucas, but when it came to their relationship, things felt different. Emma wasn't as warm as she used to be. She had stopped asking about Ryan's trips or showing interest in his latest photo shoots. The tipping point came one evening when Ryan arrived home early from a week-long trip. He had been in New Zealand capturing an extreme sports event. The journey had been exhausting, but all Ryan could think about was coming home to Emma and Lucas. But when he entered the house, it wasn't the warm, familiar welcome he was used to. The house was quiet. Too quiet. "Emma?" Ryan called out, setting down his bags. There was no immediate response. He walked through the house, checking every room. The sound of Lucas's toys in the living room was the only indication that the child was home. But there was no sign of Emma. Ryan's stomach tightened. It wasn't like her not to greet him when he came home early. She was always the one who asked about his trip, who laughed at the stories from his shoots. She was his anchor. He checked his phone. No messages. He walked into the kitchen, where Emma's phone was lying on the counter. Her messages were open. At first glance, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But then something caught his eye, a message from a number he didn't recognize. "I'll make sure you're free tonight. Can't wait to see you, beautiful." Ryan's heart skipped a beat. His mind raced. He stared at the message, confused and unsettled. He didn't recognize the name, and Emma had never mentioned anyone by that name. The message seemed intimate, almost flirtatious. He felt a cold shiver run down his spine. Just as he was processing the message, Emma walked into the kitchen. She stopped in her tracks when she saw him holding her phone. A flicker of panic flashed across her face before she forced a smile. "Ryan, you're home early," she said, her voice trying to sound light. "I didn't expect you back until tomorrow." Ryan didn't say anything immediately. He simply handed her the phone. "Who's this?" he asked quietly. Emma froze for a second, her eyes darting between Ryan and the phone. She hesitated before speaking. "It's just a friend, Ryan. A colleague from work. I told you I was busy with my students. It's nothing." Ryan tried to stay calm, though a wave of anger and confusion was rising within him. He had seen the way she responded to the message, the way her hand trembled slightly as she took her phone back. He had known Emma long enough to know when something wasn't right. "A colleague?" Ryan repeated. "Emma, you've never mentioned anyone named James." She looked away, clearly flustered. "It's really nothing, Ryan. Just someone I talk to about teaching. You know how stressful my job has been. I was just venting." But Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. Emma was lying, and he knew it. His heart sank as the doubt began to creep in. How long had this been going on? Was it just an emotional connection, or was it something more? The following days were filled with tension. Ryan couldn't stop thinking about the message he had seen. He tried to give Emma the benefit of the doubt, but everything felt off. The air in their house was heavy, and every time they were in the same room, there was an invisible barrier between them. Emma's avoidance was more obvious now. She had become more secretive with her phone, always texting or taking calls in another room. Ryan didn't want to jump to conclusions. But he knew he had to find out the truth. His suspicions weren't going away, and the thought of Emma hiding something from him gnawed at him every moment. He began to track her behavior, watching for signs. Every time she left the house, he would casually ask where she was going, and her answers seemed vague, almost rehearsed. He tried to keep his cool, not wanting to accuse her without more evidence, but the feeling of betrayal was suffocating. One evening, while Emma was in the shower, Ryan found a slip of paper in her purse. It was a small note with an address written on it. At the top of the paper were the words, "See you at 7. Don't forget the wine." His heart raced. This wasn't a casual meeting with a colleague. This was a secret rendezvous. Ryan's mind flashed back to the message he had seen on her phone. Was this the meeting she had been referring to? He didn't want to believe it, but every piece of the puzzle was starting to fit together. He had to confront her again, but this time, he wasn't going to hold back. Ryan had already made up his mind. He couldn't live with the uncertainty any longer. He needed to confront Emma. There was no more pretending that everything was okay. He knew he couldn't just keep ignoring what was happening in his own home, no matter how painful it was. The next morning, Emma was up early, just like always. She kissed him goodbye as she left for work, the same routine they'd been going through for the past few months. But today, Ryan was no longer pretending. The note with the address was still in his pocket, burning a hole in his mind. He wasn't going to wait for some perfect moment. Today, he would find the truth. It was a late afternoon when he decided to visit the address on the slip of paper. Emma had mentioned she was working late, and Ryan knew this would be his chance. He left Lucas with his sister, who had come to visit, and drove to the address in a part of town he didn't recognize. The closer he got to the location, the more his heart raced. He tried to stay calm, but the unease gnawed at him. He parked a few blocks away, out of sight, and walked the rest of the way. It was a small, quiet building in a less-than-ideal part of town. The area seemed quiet, too quiet. As Ryan approached the building, he noticed a car parked nearby, and his heart sank when he recognized it. It was Emma's. She was here. With him. The man she had been seeing behind his back. He stood in the shadows, unsure of how to proceed. He wanted to storm in, confront them both, but something inside told him to wait. He didn't want to make a scene, at least not yet. He stood there, watching, hoping to get some answers, but as the minutes passed, his anxiety only increased. After what felt like an eternity, the front door opened. Emma stepped out, dressed in a light jacket and looking completely different from the woman Ryan knew. She smiled, and Ryan's heart dropped when he saw who stepped out beside her. It was James, the man from the text messages. He was laughing, his hand resting casually on Emma's shoulder. Ryan's blood ran cold. He couldn't breathe. The vision before him, Emma laughing with James, the intimacy between them, was a betrayal he could no longer deny. It wasn't just a mistake, it was a full-blown affair. They walked to the car together, talking in hushed tones, and Ryan couldn't bring himself to look away. He watched as Emma and James got into the car, the door shutting behind them with a finality that felt like a slap to the face. He stood there in silence for what felt like hours, numb to everything around him. The life he had known, the trust he had placed in Emma, had all been a lie. Ryan had never felt so conflicted in his life. He knew he couldn't just let this go. But as he drove home that evening, the weight of the situation pressed down on him. He needed to confront Emma, but he didn't know how to begin. The person he thought he knew so well had turned out to be someone he didn't recognize. When he walked into the house, Emma was there, waiting for him, just as he had expected. She was standing by the kitchen counter, looking as if nothing was wrong. She gave him a warm smile. "Hey, babe. You're home early," she said, her tone sweet, but Ryan could hear the underlying tension in her voice. Ryan didn't say anything. He walked into the living room, his face set in a hard expression. He wasn't about to play games anymore. He needed answers, and he needed them now. "Emma," Ryan began, his voice calm but cold, "I saw you." Emma's smile faltered, and her eyes widened, clearly unsure of what he meant. "I saw you with James," he said, his voice harder now. "I saw you both leave that building. I know everything." Emma's face turned pale. For a long moment, she didn't speak, her mouth opening and closing as if trying to find the right words. Ryan, please, I can explain," she stammered. Ryan shook his head, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Explain what?" "That you've been seeing him behind my back. That you've been lying to me for months." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but Ryan couldn't bring himself to feel sorry for her. "Not anymore. I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered, taking a tentative step toward him. "I was lonely. You're always gone, and I don't know what happened. It just happened." Ryan's jaw tightened as he stepped back. "I was always there for you, Emma. Always. I supported you. I loved you. And you repay me with this." She reached out to him, her hands trembling. "I never wanted to hurt you. I love you, Ryan. I made a mistake. I made a huge mistake, and I regret it. Please, please don't leave me." "You don't get to ask me not to leave," Ryan said, his voice low. "You've already left me, Emma. You've been gone for months, and I never even knew it." Emma's tears flowed freely now. "Please, Ryan. I don't want to lose you." Ryan stepped back, his hands shaking. "I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't know if I can even look at you the same way after this. I'm not going to stay here and be lied to anymore," Ryan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't think I can even stay in this house with you. I need to think. I need space." He turned and walked out of the room, his heart heavy with the knowledge that everything had changed. He had no idea what the future held, but he knew one thing: he couldn't stay in this broken marriage anymore. The trust had been shattered beyond repair. The next few days were a blur for Ryan. He couldn't think straight. His emotions were all over the place: anger, confusion, sadness. He spent most of his time outside, taking long walks, trying to find clarity in his thoughts. The affair wasn't just a betrayal of love, it was a betrayal of everything they had built together. Their future, their family, it all felt like a lie now. Emma reached out multiple times, begging for him to come home, but Ryan couldn't face her. He didn't know what to say. His mind was clouded, his heart broken. He knew that the man he had been in that marriage, trusting, loving, devoted, was gone. Emma had taken that from him. He needed time to think. But more than that, he needed answers. He needed to figure out if there was any chance of salvaging his marriage or if it was truly over. Days turned into weeks. Ryan had moved out of their shared bedroom and started staying with a close friend, Chris, who had known him for years. The house felt empty without Emma, but Ryan wasn't sure if that was a relief or just another layer of pain. He spent his days doing what he did best, working on photo shoots for his extreme sports gigs, going through the motions of his job, but feeling hollow inside. He was no longer the man he used to be. Emma kept calling, texting, sending him letters, but Ryan ignored every attempt. He had no words left for her. What was there to say after everything that had happened? After everything he had seen and heard? He had been betrayed, but more than that, he had been left in the dark while she built a secret life behind his back. Still, the silence of his friend's apartment didn't feel like home. The pain he had tried to bury continued to surface, and he couldn't escape it. It followed him everywhere, in the quiet moments, in the middle of his busiest days. It was like a weight on his chest, a constant reminder that everything had been turned upside down. One evening, after a particularly difficult photo shoot, Ryan found himself in a local bar, nursing a beer. His thoughts were still tangled in confusion and bitterness when he noticed a familiar face across the room. It was Julia, an old friend from college who had been close to both him and Emma in the early years of their relationship. Julia had always been the life of the party, bright, confident, and adventurous, qualities that Ryan had always admired. She spotted him immediately and walked over with a warm smile. "Ryan. I haven't seen you in forever. How are you?" she asked, her voice cheerful. Ryan forced a smile. "I'm getting by," he said, his voice flat. Julia's expression softened when she saw the look in his eyes. "What's going on? You look like you've seen a ghost." Ryan hesitated for a moment, unsure of how much to reveal. But something about Julia's concern made him feel like he could talk. "I'm not okay, Julia," he said quietly, taking a long drink of his beer. "I don't know how to deal with what's happened." Her brow furrowed. "What do you mean? What's going on?" Ryan leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. He had never been good at hiding his feelings, and right now, everything was spilling out. "I found out Emma's been having an affair. With a guy named James. I caught them in the act, and now I don't even know who she is anymore." Julia's face turned pale, but she quickly masked it. "I'm so sorry, Ryan. I had no idea." He could see the genuine sympathy in her eyes, but it didn't make the pain any easier to bear. "It's not just that," he continued, feeling the weight of everything coming down on him. "It's the lies, the secrecy. I gave her everything. Our family, our home, and she just threw it all away." Julia sat down across from him, her voice softening. "I can't imagine how hard that must be. But listen, Ryan, you've got to take care of yourself, okay? You can't keep drowning in this. You deserve someone who can match your energy, who sees you for who you are." Ryan's eyes met hers, and for a moment, he was struck by how much time had passed since they had last spoken. Julia was still the same, free-spirited, easy to talk to, but she was also someone who understood the weight of a broken heart. The following days were a blur. Ryan found himself spending more time with Julia, her presence strangely comforting in the chaos of his life. They went hiking together, grabbed lunch, and spent hours talking about everything and nothing. Julia didn't push him to talk about Emma, she just gave him the space to breathe. But Ryan couldn't deny the connection that was forming between them. One evening, as they were sitting on a bench at the park, Julia turned to him, her voice thoughtful. "You know, I've been thinking. You deserve more than what Emma gave you. I don't just mean in the relationship, I mean in life. You have so much to offer, Ryan. You've got this incredible energy, this passion for living that not many people have. Don't let her take that from you." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He hadn't realized how much he had allowed Emma's betrayal to define him. He had been walking around in a fog, unsure of who he was without her. A week later, Ryan found himself at a crossroad. He couldn't stay in the apartment forever, and he couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay. As much as he had wanted to find answers and seek revenge on Emma, he realized that wasn't the path he wanted to take. What he needed was to reclaim his life, to take back control, and to finally move on. The first step was the hardest. He called Emma. "Ryan, I've been trying to reach you. I'm so sorry. Please, let's talk about this." Emma's voice was shaky, and Ryan could tell she had been crying. "I don't think we have anything left to talk about," he said, his voice firm but calm. "You've made your choice, and I've made mine. I'm not coming back." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Ryan could hear her soft sobs, but he didn't feel the familiar pull of sympathy. He had already grieved the loss of their marriage, and now, it was time for him to move forward. Months passed, and with each passing day, Ryan felt the weight of his old life lifting off his shoulders. He moved into a new apartment, sold the house, and took time off from his photography career. Instead, he started traveling, exploring new places, capturing moments that reignited the passion he once had for his work. He began training for new extreme sports challenges, pushing himself further than he ever had before. Through it all, Julia remained a close friend, and slowly, the nature of their relationship began to change. What started as companionship blossomed into something deeper. They had both been hurt, but through their shared experiences, they found solace in one another.